Have you ever thought about how the Stoicism, all that ancient wisdom, it's really deep stuff, but then when you try to actually live it out, it gets kind of, I don't know, philosophically messy.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially for those of us who really dig into the whole philosophy thing, is that gap between the theory and actually living it that's the juicy part, isn't it?
Totally. And that's exactly what we're all about here on the deep dive, diving deep into those intellectual puzzles. And today, we're going full on Roman Emperor mode with Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, this guy, talk about trying to walk the walk. He's leading the Roman Empire, steeped in Stoic thought, and actually trying to use those principles to navigate everything life throws at him.
It's like the ultimate test of, does this philosophy actually work when things get real? And to really break it down to understand the nuts and bolts of how he approached it all.
We're going with a super helpful guide, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on Marcus Aurelius.
Ah, the SC. Always solid.
Totally. What's great about the essay for this deep dive is that it gives us this structured expert view. We can move past the surface level, the inspirational quotes and all that, to get into the specifics of how Marcus really lived Stoicism. Like you said, it's not just what he believed, but how he actually did it.
Right. And that's the part that always trips people up. So our mission today, especially for a philosophy fan like you listening, is to take you way beyond those Stoicism sound bites you see everywhere. We're going deep into the core stuff Marcus was wrestling with, the really tricky philosophical bits, the real-life struggles that the essay points out. We're aiming for a deep, complex understanding of Stoicism, not just as history, but as a lived philosophy.
It's crucial to remember, too, Marcus Aurelius wasn't just some guy writing in his diary. This was the Roman emperor, 2nd century CE. He's got immense power, facing constant pressure wars, plagues, you name it all, while trying to live by these Stoic ideals.
Yeah, the stakes are a little higher than your average philosophy student.
Right. His meditations, his personal reflections,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a window into applied philosophy at the highest level. A chance to see Stoicism in action, not just theory.
Okay, so let's say you're trying to get into his head, understand his approach from a philosopher's point of view. First, we got to talk about Meditations itself. The Aesep makes this really interesting point. It's different from a lot of other ancient philosophy texts.
Yeah, you read that first book, book 1, feels kind of like acknowledgments, shout outs to his teachers.
Right, but then after that, it's not so clear cut. The structure is, well,
almost organic, you could say. Not your typical step-by-step philosophical argument. More like these ongoing reflections, coming back to certain ideas over and over.
and a lot of it is in this aphoristic style, short, thought-provoking bits. If you're used to those dense philosophical treatises, this could seem kind of all over the place,
The Aesep points this out for sure. It's definitely not a systematic treatise like what you'd get from Plato or Aristotle. But even early on, people noticed this unique thing about meditations. Themistius, back in the 4th century, called them precepts. Suidas described them as leading, like giving direction. And Arethes, his description is pretty spot on, writings to himself. It wasn't meant to be this big public philosophical statement,
It seems so much more personal.
Totally. And scholars today, they agree with that view, building on work like Brunt's analysis. The main goal wasn't to convince anyone or build some grand philosophical system. It was for Marcus himself, for his own moral development. He's constantly reminding himself about these core Stoic ideas, how providence governs everything, how virtue is the only good, the whole indifference to externals thing, and the interconnectedness of everyone, that we're all in this together kind of vibe.
Which, if you think about it, it's like Epictetus's advice. The Sepi talks about this too. Epictetus said to write down your responses to stuff, rehearse how you'll deal with life's challenges. And it's almost like Marcus is doing that, but with these huge philosophical concepts, he keeps coming back to them to really make them a part of himself.
Exactly. And the terms Marcus uses for his own writing, they support that idea. Words like supports, peristemata, records, parapegmata, even rules. It's like he's building his own personal philosophical toolkit, not writing for a philosophy journal.
And the SAP, they have this interesting take on why he uses the aphoristic style. They say for someone already deep into Stoic thought, even these short, almost cryptic sayings, they could be powerful, like a trigger, instantly bringing up a deeper understanding. It's like philosophical shorthand for someone who's already done the groundwork.
Right. And so much is left unexplained, like personal events or specific Stoic terms. Makes sense if he's writing for himself, right? He doesn't need to spell it out if he already gets it.
Makes sense. And the Seppi emphasizes this therapeutic context. which is so key if we're trying to understand what he's doing. We can't just read these as random philosophist statements. We have to think about what he's trying to do morally and psychologically. Like, what internal battle is he fighting? What's the mindset he's trying to build in himself?
Yeah, that's the lens we need for meditations. Less about building a theory, more about self-management, the constant work of living by these principles.
Which takes us to, the big question for any ethics system. And I know this will resonate with your, philosophical mind. What, according to Marcus and the Stoics, should actually guide our actions? What's the compass?
The SP quotes this really insightful passage from Meditations, Book 8, Verse 1. Marcus is talking about how hard it is to live as a philosopher, and he defines living well as acting based on what human nature wants, guided by what's good and evil.
Yeah, that gets right to it. Living a good life is about aligning with our nature, and he ties that to the core Stoic idea. True good is virtue, true evil is vice, everything else is indifferent. And the set points out how consistent this idea is in Stoicism. From Cleanthes, who famously said living in agreement with nature, to Chrysippus, who had this more detailed definition, living according to the experience of what happens by nature. They're different, but the core is the same. Understand the universe, act accordingly.
And here's where the philosophy gets real. Sebi puts it perfectly. How do we actually put this into practice? Everyday life throws all this stuff at us. It's not like we can just follow our gut all the time. There needs to be something more, methodical.
And one big step, according to Marcus, is changing how we think about good and bad altogether. The Seppi explains how getting hung up on stuff like pleasure or pain being good or bad, that just leads to all this negativity, resentment when things don't go our way, even disrespect towards the natural order itself.
Right, if you're convinced pleasure is some ultimate good, you're going to resent those who seem to have it without deserving it. And flip side, if you see pain as pure evil, you're going to end up blaming the universe for allowing suffering. Which, to the Stoics, that's like fighting against reality.
But the Seppi pushes this further. It's just getting rid of those beliefs enough to act virtuously. Even if we understand intellectually that pleasure and pain are indifferent to our well-being, we still got to make choices. How do we deal with them in a way that actually fits with Stoic ideals?
That's what the essay calls the deliberative content problem. Even if you intellectually grasp the idea of indifference, you still need practical advice. Seneca, as the SCP mentions, thought we always need preceptus-specific guidelines even after you've gotten rid of vice and bad opinions. We can still mess up just from lack of experience, not just emotions.
So it's more than just knowing the theory. And the SF digs into how Marcus might solve this. Could it be that the virtue is in the action itself, or maybe in the thoughts behind it? But then, if only virtue is good, how do we even know what a virtuous action is in real life, with all its complexity?
Big question, right at the heart of Stoic ethics. As the SE points out, telling someone be virtuous is a direction, but not a map.
Right. Let's look closer at that core Stoic idea. What's good, bad, indifferent? The SEP lays it out clearly. Virtue is the only good, vice the only bad. Everything else, money, health, fame, all indifferent when it comes to true happiness.
Yep. Those so-called indifferents can't make or break your eudaimonia. But, and here's a question the SE brings up that I bet you'll appreciate. If everything else is indifferent, how do we choose between them? Why pick health over sickness, comfort over poverty? Shouldn't it all be the same to a Stoic?
Well, the Stoics had an answer for that. The SEP explains how they say some indifferents are preferred because they're more in line with our nature, like health, strength, enough resources. Those generally fit us better than being sick, weak, or poor.
And Cicero, whose ideas the SEP also brings in, he argued that if all indifferents were totally equal, then what's the point of a Stoic sage's perfect reason? If it doesn't matter what you choose, what good is wisdom?
Right, there's got to be some point to making good choices. And that leads to the idea of appropriate actions, or kathekanta, a term even Marcus used, the Six points out. These actions have a reasonable justification, a eulogon. It's not just picking randomly between indifferents.
And the Aseb stresses that this reasonableness isn't based on what the average person thinks, but on right reason, according to someone fully virtuous, meaning there's an objectively best choice in any situation, which Chrysippus, his writings back this up.
But here's the thing, and the SIPP makes this really important distinction. An appropriate action isn't always about getting preferred indifference for yourself. Imagine a Stoic sacrificing their life for their country, clearly not focused on their own well-being, right?
That's a crucial point. And it gets even trickier with Chrysippus's idea about aligning your actions with fate. if you knew it. It's like, without perfect knowledge, the best we can do is choose what helps us get those things in line with our nature, like staying healthy.
Makes you think, right? The essay brings up this interesting point. Is being according to nature more about how we see things, which things we focus on when deciding, or is it about those things having actual value in themselves? It's subtle, but it changes how we understand Stoic choices.
And then you got Aristo of Chios, as the SF mentions, who took this even further.
Yeah.
He said no indifferents are preferred by nature at all. It all depends on the context. What's good in one situation might be bad in another.
Interesting take. But the main Stoic view, the SF says, was that some things are just better by nature. And they split appropriate actions into two types, universal ones, like taking care of your health, and those that are only right in specific situations, like needing surgery, or even something like mutilation to save your life.
Which then brings up the potential conflict, right?
Yeah.
What if what's good for you as an individual clashes with what's good for the universe, for fate? The SP explains how the Stoics dealt with this by pointing to our shared rationality and the idea of a providential cosmos. Because we can reason, we can understand that what fixed the grand design of the universe is ultimately good, even if it doesn't feel good to us right now.
And that connects to oikiosis, such a key Stoic concept, often translated as natural concern. It's the foundation, the SP says, for why we should value the good of the community. And the cool thing about the indifference of externals, as the SEPI argues, is that it helps us be impartial.
Yeah, because you're not so driven by your own desire for wealth or fame.
Yeah.
You can focus on how those things can be used fairly for the good of everyone. It's not about me, it's about the big picture.
Which brings us nicely to justice and the idea of the cosmopolis. The SB highlights how much Marcus talks about acting justly and loving what fate gives you. And for him, acting justly wasn't just about being fair to individuals. It was about acting communally, like a citizen of this huge cosmic city.
That cosmos as a city analogy is central to Marcus's ethics, according to the SEPI. It's the basis for his idea that we have a duty, just like a citizen in a regular city, to work for the good of all humanity. We're all citizens of this cosmopolis, so we got to look out for each other.
And the SEPI makes this fascinating point. Marcus seems to define the goal of the community in terms of those very indifference we were talking about. Like, our aim as cosmic citizens should be to provide those preferred indifference food for the hungry, for example, for everyone, even though those things aren't inherently good in the strict Stoic sense.
Right. It's about putting those practical benefits into action while still working within the Stoic framework.
And since we can't control everything, the SEPI notes that Marcus says to pursue these goals with reservation, like be aware of fate, that things might not go your way. Do your part, but accept what happens.
It all comes back to oikiosis, caring for others, which for Marcus was a part of our rational nature. He even told himself to think of other people as his own family when trying to do what's best for them.
And the SEP emphasizes how Marcus believed that reason naturally leads us to act for the common good. He thought this communal faculty, to koinonikon, was a major part of who we are. And he saw justice as the highest form of reason, even suggesting that every action we take can contribute to the well-being of this cosmic political life.
And he even said in a really thought-provoking passage that the SEP points out that the good of a rational being is the same as the good of the community. That shows how deeply interconnected everything was for him.
Totally. And lastly on this, the SEP talks about how Marcus absolutely rejected the idea that individual good and communal good clash. He thought the whole is only perfect if all the parts are functioning well. Like he used the analogy of limbs and the body, what hurts one hurts the whole.
Though the SEP acknowledges there are counterarguments, like Stryker, who argued that being human is more than just being a cosmic citizen. But for Marcus, the core seems to be this belief that we're fundamentally parts of this cosmic city, and we thrive when it thrives.
Okay, let's move on to this Stoic idea of piety and how it's tied to providence. The SEP explains that for Marcus, piety wasn't so much about rituals, it was more about deeply accepting everything that happens, seeing it all as part of a universe designed by providence, like recognizing that the universe as a whole is as good as it can be, and so it deserves our acceptance, even our love.
And the SIP clarifies something important about how the Stoics saw impulse and desire. It wasn't just about limiting desire to things you can't control. They knew we react to external stuff too, and those reactions are also impulses. The key is managing those desires, either directing them towards things we can influence or toning down how much we crave stuff outside our control, especially stuff based on thinking external things are good or bad.
Which links directly to how Marcus emphasized welcoming espasomene rather than desiring orexis, what happens to us. The Sepp says the difference is in the intention. Desire is actively chasing something, while welcoming is being content with whatever comes. It's a subtle difference, but it changes your whole outlook.
And this idea of piety, of appreciating how providence orders the universe. The JCVP points out it's key to understanding those two phrases Marcus keeps using in Meditations. Providence or atoms, and erase impressions.
Let's break down that first one. Providence or atoms. The Sipke notes he uses it 9 times. It's the fundamental choice: believe in a universe guided by a good, intelligent providence, the Stoic and Platonist view, or a universe that's just random atoms bumping around, the Epicurean view.
And the SCP looks at why he keeps bringing this up. Was he unsure about some details of Stoic physics? Was he saying to live ethically no matter what you believe about the universe? Or is he showing how even very different philosophies could agree on some ethics, even with totally different views on how the universe works?
Right. And the SE highlights this one passage where Marcus brings up this providence or atoms thing while talking about how much agreement there was ethically between different ancient schools, Stoics, Epicureans, even guys like Democritus and Plato. They all agreed externals don't matter that much, and inner virtue is key.
Yeah, and even Epicurus' views on death and dealing with pain, they get brought in too, the SCP notes. Like, it's about building that inner strength no matter what you think about the universe ultimately.
But the SC argues Marcus wasn't actually wavering in his Stoic beliefs. His writing shows he really believed in an intelligent, interconnected, purposeful universe, and in himself as a part of it. When he sounds unsure about specific physical theories, it's probably more like he didn't have all the technical details, not that he doubted the whole Stoic framework.
And get this, the SE points out how Marcus used the idea of providence itself to argue for the indifference of externals. He says that if things like wealth and health are handed out without any clear connection to whether someone deserves them, then they can't be truly good, because that would mean the universe isn't just and governed by providence.
So smart. But the SCP clarifies that this isn't the basis of his whole ethics system. It's more like an extra argument, a backup to support his beliefs when things get tough, like having a few good reasons to kick a bad habit.
And lastly on this, the SB explains how providence, or atoms, fights against impiety. Because if you're not happy with how the world is, you're basically saying it's random, not guided by providence, which goes against a core Stoic idea. So in this context, atoms represent that impiety, that disconnect from the natural order.
So those slogans, they seem simple, but to really get them, you got to think about how Marcus is using them, what state of mind he's going for. It's not always about arguing philosophy, more about practical self-improvement.
Right, the inner work, which takes us to our last big point, the command Marcus keeps giving. Erase excelixi impressions.
Fantasia.
Now, knowing how the Stoics saw knowledge, those first impressions are mostly automatic. We can't control them. So what does this erase thing even mean?
Good question. The SCP explains that the Stoics saw impressions like images, representations in your mind. We don't control those first impressions, but we do control our assent, whether we accept or reject them as true. The ideal Stoic sage, they only accept cataleptic impressions, ones so clear they must be true. So erase can't mean literally wiping out those first automatic impressions, right?
Haddon had an interesting take on this. The SE mentions it. He thought erase impressions meant only accepting objective physical descriptions of things, like strip away all your value judgments. But the SE counters this, saying the Stoics did believe in objective value when it comes to virtue and vice. And Marcus himself, he clearly admired the beauty and goodness of the universe.
Yeah, he wasn't just trying to see everything as neutral. And the Seppi emphasizes that while Marcus, following Epictetus, definitely said not to judge externals as good or bad in the ultimate sense, those terms are only for virtue and vice. He also had this technique of describing valuable things in a super basic way. Food is just meat, wine is just grapes. It was a way to detach, to see through those surface-level values.
But the essay points out that's just one part of how Marcus dealt with impressions. Equally important, and maybe even more Stoic, is putting things back into their cosmic context, seeing how everything contributes to the universe working as a whole, even something seemingly bad, like cracks in bread. You can understand it as a natural part of change.
And knowing how something fits into the universe, the essay says, that's how you see its true value. It's about shifting perspective from a selfish view to seeing how everything's connected and has a purpose.
The C page also talks about how Marcus seems to use impressions, fantasiae, and opinions kind of interchangeably. They say the word impression back then was broader, including stuff we'd call beliefs or judgments today.
And drawing on Plato's Protagoras, this essay suggests Marcus might have thought impressions could be distorted, like how things can look different depending on your perspective, which means you got to constantly correct them with reason, ethics, and good old philosophical dialogue, all based on understanding the whole picture.
They even propose override as a better way to think of erase when it comes to those first involuntary impressions, like consciously focusing on the big picture, the rational order of the cosmos, to counter those potentially misleading first impressions. And that wax tablet analogy fits here too. Not wiping the first impression away, but writing a truer, deeper understanding over it.
And lastly, the essay mentions Marcus saying that your mind becomes what you let in, meaning even though we can't control those first sensory experiences, if we keep refusing to accept those negative or misleading impressions, over time, we can control what thoughts and values shape us.
So erase impressions isn't about emptying your mind and pretending your experiences don't exist. It's about actively shaping your judgment, how you understand the world, using reason and a deep understanding of how the universe works, how it's all connected and governed by providence.
So, to sum up for you, fellow philosopher, this deep dive into meditations, guided by the Essu's insights, it's a masterclass in applied philosophy. We see this brilliant mind struggling with the real practical challenges of living as a Stoic. His thoughts on preferred indifference, that deep idea of justice as being a citizen of the cosmos, his constant work on managing impressions. It shows how deep and complex this ancient wisdom really is when you try to live it in the real world.
And like you've heard going through this text with the Essu's structured analysis, you get so much more out of it than just skimming the surface. It's like a shortcut to really understanding Stoicism, its subtleties, and why it still matters today.
And thinking about those super personal reflections of Marcus, what does it tell us that even an emperor with all that power still struggled with Stoicism? Does it show us that there's always this tension, this inevitable gap between those lofty philosophical ideals and the messiness of being human? It's a question that's still relevant today, centuries later. We encourage you to explore meditations for yourself and maybe even think about your own impressions, how they line up with your understanding of your place in the universe.
Yeah, give it a shot.
Join us next time for another deep dive. We've got a topic lined up that'll really get those philosophical gears turning. Until then, happy pondering.